Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Oldham, and I'll be sharing today's devotional with you. We're going to be continuing in the book of 1 Peter, starting chapter 3 today, and we'll be getting a very brief but interesting perspective on the concept of submission and the power that's inherent in that in the context of the marriage relationship. So let's go ahead and read today's passage. We'll be starting in chapter 3, verse 1. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. So why is Peter talking about this? Well, we have to remember that in the original letters of the apostles, there are no chapter divisions. So verse 1 is simply a continuation of what we've already been reading about in chapter 2, where Peter's talking about God's established order for things. The key word here is likewise, and that's an indication to us that Peter's continuing what he's already been talking about up to this point, and that is the submission of men to the government and the submission of slaves to masters. If we look back for a second to chapter 2 of 1 Peter, in verse 13 he writes, "Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake." And in chapter 2, verse 18, he continues, "Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear," and he goes on. So we see this natural progression as he continues to elaborate on how we as believers are to conduct ourselves according to God's order for things. And in this particular context, when we talk about submission, Peter's not talking about submission in the sense of it being a forced behavior or one that implies any type of inferiority on the part of the one who is doing the submitting. In fact, it's just the opposite. Peter's talking about a voluntary attitude, a voluntary selflessness on the part of the person submitting so that they're in line with God's established order. When we come to chapter 3, we see that Peter's now applying this concept to a wife submitting to her husband in recognition of the order God has established in the home or in the marriage relationship. And so what does that submission mean? What is it supposed to look like? Well, Peter tells us it's with respectful and pure conduct. This is how you or I or any believer is to live a godly life. And it's this kind of behavior that demonstrates the character and nature and conduct of Jesus. So the next question then is, how do we have this nature? Well, Jesus himself describes it and he models it in his own life. And we can see examples of this throughout the Gospels. And just for a couple of quick examples, let's look at Mark chapter 10, verse 42, where we read, "But Jesus called them, his disciples, to himself and said to them, 'You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall become your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many.'" Again, in John chapter 13, Jesus tells us this in verses 34 through 35. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." In other words, this is the conduct that Jesus is saying demonstrates a transformed heart, one that has been submitted to the ultimate authority of Jesus and has been changed. This is the witness we as believers have and bear before others that can ultimately win just one more for the kingdom. And here in Peter chapter 3, this is the influence Peter tells wives that they have on their own husbands. So much so, in fact, that an unbelieving husband may be won over, or maybe that just one more, who is won over simply by the conduct of their wives. And what an incredible blessing that is to husbands, not to mention the rest of the home and the family. When a wife's conduct is conformed to the character, nature, and conduct of Jesus, it has the power to bring about true transformation in her husband. And that's pretty incredible. I hope this has been encouraging to you. God bless you, and we'll see you all back here tomorrow.